the pollution they are making, but it doesn't work? How shocking. Why would they trick us with fake technology that pretends to do something about the dangerously warming planet while they continue to make obscene profits? We're all going to die on a burning planet thanks to the lies of the petro-industrial complex. Happy days. The in-studio political panel All-Stars are up shortly, but first, this week's one-on-one in 10 with Labour leader Chris Hipkins. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate, Chippy. Your democracy is grateful. Are you there?
I am indeed. Great to talk to you, Bomber.
Before the budget scrutiny, your thoughts on the banishment and punishment of Māori MPs today?
Totally disproportionate to the level of offending. When you break the rules, you expect there to be some sanction. I think the Māori Party should have expected there to be some sanction, but 21 days is absolutely ridiculous. Never before has a government used its majority to banish three of the opponents for a period of 21 days like that. And, you know, it's never happened before, and there's no real justification for it. Can you imagine the outcry if Jacinda Ardern's government had banned David Seymour from Parliament for 21 days?
Right.
Can you imagine the outcry if Helen Clark's government had banned Rodney Hyde for 21 days? And yet, you know, Rodney Hyde in particular was probably just as badly behaved, if not worse behaved, than what we've seen. And he probably deserved it on more than one or two occasions. But never happened because it's not democratic.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Chippy. Comrade, I put to you that the political left in New Zealand have miscomprehended Nicola Willis and her budget butchery. Voters do not appreciate how much of a wide-eyed free market New Zealand initiative acolyte that Nicola Willis is. She believes as a matter of faith that if you cut back the state, the free market will step in and do the job cheaper. There is no economic plan here because as far as the Minister of Finance is concerned, the savage cuts to public services is the economic plan. What is Labour going to do about it?
Well, I mean, this government seems to run the entire government on the basis of Simon Says. You know, watch what they're doing, not what they're saying, because they provide all these reassuring words. Oh, it's not that big of a cut, or we're just doing a little bit here, a little bit there. But actually, if you look at what they're doing, it is significant. It's a lot more significant than what they're saying. And in other areas where they're saying, oh, we're doing these major changes, they're actually not doing very much at all. So they're saying, for example, oh, we're going to be the greatest infrastructure government that the country's ever seen. They've cut the amount of money that we're spending on infrastructure. They spent less money on infrastructure last year than was spent the year before, and yet they claim that they're somehow fixing the infrastructure by spending less money on it. So this is a government that you have to watch their actions, not what they say. What Labour has said that we will do is we will focus on getting the country moving again, jobs, health, homes being right at the forefront of what we want to see the government focused on and what we will focus on as a government. You know, people need a good job, a good income, because that determines so many of the other things in their lives, access to good healthcare and a place to call home. It's not too much for Kiwis to ask.
We have $200 million for tobacco subsidies, $14 billion for tax cuts we can't afford, $3 billion for landlord loopholes, and $12 billion for the military. But we don't have enough money for the 200,000 working women and men who have just had pay parity kicked out from under them. Would a Labour-led government immediately move to bring the thresholds back and settle those 33 claims?
Yes, absolutely. This was unfinished business from our time in government. You know, I was really proud as Minister of Education to oversee a number of pay equity settlements in the education area, because I'm simply not willing to accept women being paid less than men for work of the same value. But there's still more work to be done. I think we were about halfway through the pay equity process when the election rolled around and we lost the ability to finish that. Not much has happened since then, but that's largely because the government haven't been willing to reach any settlements since then. I think it's well and truly time that this issue was resolved, and we will absolutely see that through.
As a senior minister during COVID, you know firsthand what a state needs to function in a crisis. This government is fixated ideologically on amputating the state. Do we need an adult political discussion about the desperate need to have more teachers, doctors, nurses, public servants, counsellors, firefighters, rather than the Doge chainsaw routine that we're seeing from ACT, National and New Zealand First?
I think in some cases we need to have more of those jobs. In other cases, we need to pay them better so that we can keep the ones that we've got. So we're losing people from all of those professions. They're moving to Australia because they get paid better in Australia than they do in New Zealand. If we want to keep them here, we've got to pay them better. We've got to have better working conditions for them. I think we can't just keep asking people to do more and more for less and then wonder why they up sticks and leave and go to Australia. We actually have to balance the ledger in all respects, and that cannot be by transferring costs onto everyday working New Zealanders and leaving them to foot the bill for the government's lack of investment.
We desperately need more physical and social infrastructure. So why has Labour locked itself into the exact same neoliberal economic debt straitjacket that National have us chained to? Economist Bernard Hickey was heavily critical of your decision to strangle us with the exact same neoliberal limitations of net debt capped at 50% of GDP.
Well, I mean, I don't think we should read too much into the fact that Barbara, our finance spokesperson, Barbara Edmonds, was talking about the policy we went into the last election with. Okay. We haven't determined the policy that we're going to go into the next election with. And actually, we've got to flip that question around. Rather than setting out how much we're willing to spend or how much revenue we want to raise, we've got to ask the question, what does the country expect the government to do? So that is the very first question that you have to ask. And then you ask the question, how much revenue do we need to do that? What of these expectations should be debt funded? What should be funded for today? And we need a more mature conversation about debt. If borrowing money to pay our day-to-day bills is not sustainable, and responsible governments don't do that. But debt funding for things like long-term infrastructure investment is what countries all around the world do because it's a sensible economic management tool. We need to have that conversation because we have billions and billions of dollars of investment required in our roads, in our pipes, in our schools, in our hospitals, and the physical infrastructure we rely on as a country. And somehow we've got to pay for this. And, the government's talk of private equity isn't the answer because, it may be a shock horror to the government, but those private investors aren't just going to give us the money out of the goodness of their hearts. They want it back and they want a return on it. So we're still going to have to pay for all of those things.
Kiwis want you to borrow for more roads, affordable homes, hospitals, state houses. We're happy to borrow if the infrastructure gets built. So where is Labour going to be in terms of giving people those kind of answers?
Well, if you look at some of the investments that we did make in government, we built more state houses than any government in recent history. Yeah. And yes, that resulted in some debt funding because like when you build a brand new house, if you're a household, and Nicola Willis loves to compare the economy to a household, even though it isn't, but if you are a household, typically if you're building a new house, you'll borrow some money from the bank to finance that. And the government did the same thing. We built more state houses because we have a desperate need of housing. We built more of them than any government in recent history. And we need more of that because we need to fix up our schools. They're run down, they're overcrowded. They're not necessarily in the places we need them to be. We need to upgrade our hospitals. We're still asking our hospitals to cope with infrastructure that was built for a population of about 3 million. Now there's nearly 5.5 million people here. There's massive investment required there. And as for our pipes, some of our pipes are over 100 years old. And we wonder why they're leaking.
Yeah. What's the point of voting for a Labour Party that won't tax the rich to spend on the public services that we need?
Oh, look, we're having a debate about tax at the moment internally in the Labour Party. We will have a different tax policy at the next election. I know, of course, Bromley, you would love me to give you a scoop by saying what it's going to be. I'm not going to do that today, but it is something that we're having a conversation about. We do need to make our tax system fairer than it is now. Salary and wage earners pay a disproportionate share of New Zealand's tax take compared to other countries that we would compare ourselves to.
There are 14 billionaires in New Zealand, 3,118 ultra-high net worth individuals. Let's start with them, then move on to the banks, then the property speculators, the climate change polluters, and big industry. I'm not looking for socialism from Labour, Chippy. I'm just wanting basic regulated capitalism. Tell me we're going to smash up that supermarket duopoly if you get back in.
Oh, look, we've got to look at what we can do around the supermarkets. We've got a lot of hot talk from the government. They haven't actually done anything about it. It's a bit like their hot talk on the banks, where they've bashed up the banks over the last month or so, the last year or so, and yet what their solution is now appears to be to basically say to the Reserve Bank, stop being mean to the banks.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think we've had a lot of hot rhetoric from the government, not a lot of action there. I do think we need more action there. New Zealand is not a competitive economy. There's far too much monopolistic behaviour in New Zealand's economy, and we do need, if this government want New Zealand to be a capitalist paradise, they could start by making sure that our markets are actually competitive, because many of them aren't.
Preach. Finally, I don't want to rehash the C-word debacle, but for all the grief the left get for being anti-free speech, your position that it shouldn't be up to the government or politicians to dictate what a senior female journalist can or can't say was actually more pro-free speech than many of the right-wing free speech champions. Do you see an irony in that?
No, I don't really see an irony in it, because I'm well used to the people on the right being all in favour of free speech as long as they're the ones criticising other people, and then all opposed to any concept of free speech, wanting to cancel everybody else when anybody has the audacity to criticise them. The ACT Party are absolute masters of that. They don't believe in free speech at all. They believe in their ability to offend other people, but never to be offended themselves. That isn't free speech. Ultimately, the old saying goes, never pick a fight with, I think it was Mark Twain who said it, never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell journalists what they're allowed to put in their newspapers. Ultimately, I don't think politicians should get into that territory.
Amen. Thank you, Chippy. We will see you hopefully again next month. Thank you so much.
Good as gold. Great fun.
Thank you. Okay, now to our studio political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the Māori for all seasons, the King of the West, Māori Party President John Tamihere. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe Chippy's interview there.
Interesting.
Yeah. Our next panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House, architect of the Death Star, and New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on Chris Hipkins' interview there?
Disappointing.
Oh, disappointing? Why? Didn't go far enough?
Because it's the same stuff we've heard from a little bit from Helen Clark, a lot from John Key, even more from Jacinda Ardern, and even more again from Chris Luxon. This is not. There is a 20, 30, $40 billion gap here. If you're going to cut, if that's your strategy, you have to cut tens of billions of dollars. If you're going to use a tax strategy, you have to raise tens of billions of dollars.
Financial transaction.
Yeah, what we're told all the time is, he's going to reverse all the cuts. He's going to spend a whole lot more. He's going to borrow for infrastructure, as if you don't have to pay interest just because it's a road rather than a welfare check. And not a single comment on the revenue side.
And our final guest, recreational Jedi and the boss babe of Ravenclaw, NZCTU economist Craig Renney. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Your thoughts on Chris's interview?
I actually thought the word I would use there was confident. He sounded much more confident than I've heard him sound in the past. And in recent interviews, I've heard him, this is much more confident, Chris, than I've heard over the past few months. It's almost as if the pay equity deal, the pay exchanges and other things have actually energised him and given him an opportunity to actually talk to new people and new audiences.
Well, come on, it's pretty easy for him when he's got Christopher Luxon.
Chris Luxon is pretty awful.
Why is it taking so long?
But the phrase "never interrupt your enemy whilst they're making a mistake,"
right?
In jump on it right now, and that's the word I'd use, is confident.
Before we delve into the pre-budget special, John, an emotional day for the Māori Party banishment and punishment for protesting against the Treaty Principles referendum. How are your people doing?
Well, look, it's there's a book we all were forced to read in school fifth form, I think it's school certificate, and it was it was Lord of the Flies, and the fat kid goes down and everyone puts the boot in.
Yeah.
Half of them are beside themselves after that show of violence, right? And what you have with this present regime, I wouldn't call it a government, but the present regime, what it does is it just loves to identify, and understand this, we are a minority in this country, and the Indigenous majority at that. You can only kick someone and get the ugly underbelly of this nation helping you to do that for only so long. Yeah. And so they're running out of the ability to continue to use Māori as the political whipping board. And I just don't see it lasting, right? And the aversion to the way in which the overreach, the over-punishment, the put those hories back in their place deal, and the hate on the hories, that played out quite well for the first 6-9 months. Right. Yeah. Got to be another story pretty soon. Yeah. Because everyone's getting sick of it.
21 days is an extraordinary situation where a government is banning opposition MPs. This is crazy town, isn't it?
Well, look, there's three issues here. One is we're allowed to use our reo. It's official language of the House. When you use your reo, you import your culture and your tikanga and all of the underlying probity under that, right? So we are evolving as a nation. We're not in the Westminster system, although it was founded out of it. We're 12,000 miles away from King Charles. None of our kids have any rapport with the Crown anymore. So we're in an era of self-determination, and we're really going to have to start to see exactly where that rests. Now, here's the thing: my kids have gone on the OEs, etc., on organised trips, and the kids at the airport. There are only 4 Māoris of 22 kids going. They did a waiata and they did a haka. Now, this is how they frame their citizenship of this nation, Aotearoa. Right. The new era of Kiwis see Māoritanga as part of who they make up is, right? They're not from the old country. Like my mum was Irish, and she always used to talk about the old country. They don't see it that way anymore. We are now part of Oceania, Asia. We've got nothing to do with Europe, and definitely nothing to do with Trump and the US. So the times are changing, and this mob, with dinosaurs like that thug bloody Winston Peters and co. They always threaten people, eh? He threatens you. He threatens your funding. Threatens your job. If you get on the wrong side. So this whole range of thuggery. Being perpetrated by this present mob. Unbelievable.
Matthew, you wrote a blistering appraisal on your patron of Luxon's leadership in allowing a situation where the government is banishing opposition MP Parliament. This sort of thing happens in banana republics. Are we a milk powder republic?
Oh, that's quite a good line. I might steal that one. Future.
Feel free.
I mean, it is a tragedy we're here. We were reasonably well governed overall in this country from the mid-80s through to about 2008 under Labor. A lot of progress was made. We were reasonably well governed under John Key, if we're to be honest about it. And we particularly were well governed in that era on the question of the Treaty of Waitangi and the fact that there had to be a new approach and a reconciliation process, and it was one of the things that made me proud to be involved in the national government of the 1990s. Right. And I think it's something that most New Zealanders are deeply proud of. And the tragedy is that Christopher Luxon came along, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that. He didn't have wise people around him. He won the election. And Winston Peters and the ACT Party had no leverage. There's no way the ACT Party can go and work with Labor. And New Zealand First in that particular election, 2003, there was no way. So he was able, he should have begun those negotiations by saying, right, well, it's going to be a national government. And you guys will have to vote for our budgets and we'll promise to consult you.
Right.
And they would have said, well, hang on, we want a bit more than that. And that should have been the framework. He began it by saying, I want a three-way coalition. And so all the power drifted from the National Party into those two minor parties.
Yeah.
He then accepted the treaty principles bill, despite everybody saying, the majority of the National Party knew that. He knew it was he said he knew it was a disaster. It was never going to pass law. It was a publicity stunt for the ACT Party, but the way the haka in the Parliament was a publicity stunt for the Māori Party. But anyway, that's publicity stunts are part of politics. And he let that happen, and he clearly did not understand the implications of it.
No.
Because he doesn't know enough about New Zealand. He doesn't have enough memory and knowledge of New Zealand, enough intelligence to analyse it, or enough foresight. And this was just everybody, all the former National Party prime ministers were saying, if you do this, this is where things will play out. And exactly what was predicted by the sensible voices of the political right has unfolded. And the same thing has happened with this issue. Because what the Māori Party wants is to be imprisoned. And then they can be political prisoners, and there can be 20,000 people doing hakas on Parliament. And so I'm very proud today of Chris Bishop. I'm proud of you, Bomber, today, because you've got the show going, and it's
Thank
good
you,
to
comrade.
see. And I'm proud of my another friend, Chris Bishop, because of all the people in Parliament. After Chris Hipkins gave an excellent speech,
Great speech.
Chris Bishop said we need to take a deep breath here.
Right.
And there's a lot going on in the National Party that makes things very difficult, but he kicked for touch, and that was the right thing to do. And thank goodness for the two Chris Hipkins and Chris Bishop today.
He had to kick for touch.
Yep.
Right.
Well, you've got your marquee event, the budget, looming, and you've got the ability for a filibuster to go all the way to it.
Yeah.
Well,
they played it wrong from the get-go.
Well,
they got caught with their pants down, and he did what he had to do after the event.
Right. Craig, this government is banishing Indigenous politicians for protesting against law aimed at attacking their Indigenous rights, while the Regulatory Standards Bill is being heard, and that will take even more of their rights away. How is this anything other than a glaring indictment of the bias of the House against Māori?
I can't stress how much I'm a white guy from Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK.
Welcome.
Right? When I used to work in the Beehive, and we used to do on Māori affairs or Māori spending, the joke that I used to use, only it's a little bit of a joke, was I'm a white man desperately trapped inside the body of another white man in order to try and get around these particular problems. But the racism inherent in that proposed suspension is so glaring, I can see it from space.
Right.
It's more. I think it's more partisan.
It is.
Why has Pene Henare not been?
Well, but it is weak leadership.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And I hate to agree. I hate to start off your show by agreeing with Matthew, right? Because conflict is out of the show, but it's weak leadership, right?
Yeah.
The only person who showed any leadership from the National Party in that particular conversation was Chris Bishop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And who was actually playing real politics rather than just sort of the fantasy politics that they're trying to engage with. But no, this was frankly diabolical work all the way through. It didn't have to be this way. They could have actually put this forward last week. It didn't have to be this way. We could have dealt with this in a far more sensible way. If you think about the history of Parliament, right, the worst sanction we've had to date, the biggest suspension I believe we've had to date, has been 3 days.
Yeah, Robert Muldoon, right?
Right?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
We've had MPs offer each other outside, right, in the chamber.
Yeah.
Right? But yet this requires 21 days.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, what
This is
the
bonkers.
rules do not apply outside the chamber. Look, when that was a publicity stunt by the Māori Party. Forget this. It happened after the vote.
And what's your point?
I'm
Political
saying
theatre.
that, and that's fine. But it happened after the vote.
Yeah.
The Parliament, every party in Parliament, except for ACT, had unanimously voted down that piece of legislation, including the two other parties of the government, including the National Party, the biggest of them.
Right.
And it was at that point that it happened, which also makes a lie of the suggestion that they interrupted the vote. The vote had actually happened.
Judith was wrong.
So the idea that we're in this terrible rage because we're being persecuted, no, Parliament had just voted almost unanimously in favour of the Māori Party's position on that particular bill. So, and I think looking at the footage, I think the Debbie Nariwa Packer, she broke the rules. She went right up to them. And I'd have to say that, and she should have the book thrown at her. She broke the 2.5 sword. Whereas old Rawat, he did not. He stayed on his side of the house. There was punishment to be had.
I didn't want to get into the splitting the hairs.
It's not splitting the hairs.
The issue is the level of the punishment is the key, not your view of whether there was a breach or not. The issue that I find remarkable in all this is the C word can be premeditatedly dragged into the House. First time in the Commonwealth's history that a Minister of the Crown walks in there in a premeditated way and lays the C word on it, and that's not, there's no decorum there. That's not dragging parliamentary practices down. That's worse than any haka ever made, is what Van Velden, or whatever her name is, her Van Velden ever got up to, right?
Yeah.
Now the issue is that's swept under the carpet. It's a nice white woman. But if a brown woman had ever voiced the same thing, all hell would have broken loose.
Not if she'd got the Speaker's permission beforehand, and that was probably a mistake by the Speaker. And but there is an issue.
Is that a showboat?
You're absolutely right about the punishments, and the thing is, Parliament, the punishments are ridiculous.
Yes.
I mean, the Muldoon, it seems to me it's similar to Muldoon. Muldoon abused the Speaker, wouldn't show up. It seems about 3 days seems right. And I do believe that people can express great anger in Parliament. Now, the father of conservatism, Edmund Burke, House of Commons, 1792.
There we go.
He's the founder of conservatism. He took a dagger into the House, and they were debating whether to allow more French immigration. And he brought this dagger out on the floor of the House of Commons and threw it to the ground, and it was wrong. He was extremely angry. History doesn't say how he was punished. Admittedly, he was criticising the French, which I think most people would be fair enough. But yes, people get extremely angry. Yes, sometimes they behave badly, and there should be a punishment. And I think both sides on this should just sort of accept.
I thought there was a punchline about Edmund. What was it?
Well, the point is, people do hakas.
Right.
In their culture. And he was punished in some way. The details of it aren't, and he is revered as the father of conservatism. So getting angry and behaving a bit badly in Parliament is not the end of the world. And I think that the perpetrators should take the punishment, and the people dishing out the punishment should be sane about it.
Quick round. What happens next after all of this? Where are we going with this?
Oh, look, this is another day at the office for Māori under this regime.
Right.
Okay, so anything that works for us is being defunded.
Yes.
Anything that works for us has been disintegrated, disaggregated, whānau ora, whatever. And so it's just this incessant attack. When you see the budget on Thursday, the Māori Party analysis will demonstrate exactly what the dollars look like on the defunding.
Yeah.
The issue made is this government made much, in opposition, made much ado about Twyford, not building houses.
Yeah.
It hasn't built one. Every house in the last 2 years that has been finished was finished under the funding from the last Labor government.
Right.
No, it's just a joke.
Yeah.
In fact, the handbrake they put on the economy in terms of austerity has tanked the whole of the construction sector.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Knowingly, hundreds of men and women thrown out of work. The knock-on retail bang for buck, as soon as you hammer construction, it just winds down the whole of the economy.
Right.
And it's hurting everybody. The lack of investment and the unbundling of frontline connectors that make health work and the defunding of them is going to have a major problem this winter. And you know what's going to happen? Every A&E in every hospital is going to be tanked out.
Yeah.
Don't worry about this nonsense of this announcement about the peanuts that are going to
24-hour
Dunedin or whatever.
Yeah.
No, we're sending all our people as we must. They can't afford after hours levies.
Right.
It's a joke.
$200
and I'm
a visit.
I'm just pointing out a few things.
Yeah.
Right. Just two: housing and health.
Yeah. Matthew, what is going to happen next?
On which issue?
With the with the punishment.
Well, I think what should happen is that on the Māori Party issue, the grown-ups should talk. People like Chris Bishop, Chris Hipkins. At the very least, there needs to be a national Labour deal, and you just say to ACT in the Māori Party, well, at least then you would have sort of 70% of Parliament with a view. There is time for that. Deep breaths, people put things in perspective, hopefully, and something other. But if it goes down with a filibuster, with a 2-week ban, these guys are going to try to enter the chamber.
Yep. Right.
They're going to get arrested.
Right.
And John Tamihere will just watch his party go up in the polls.
Craig, what's going to happen?
I hope that happens.
Yes.
Which one?
I hope saner minds take over, and I hope we do have a bit of responsibility here. Chris Hipkins has offered that. It may well be a political play for the news that day, but he has offered that as part of that particular deal. Yeah. I fear what's going to happen is one of the dumbest political strategies of all time, and that we spend a long time debating this, and the National Party pulls the plaster off hair by hair. Yeah. Right? And we're still debating this 2 months from now. Right? And that will just hurt them, and it will hurt Parliament, to be deadly honest. Yeah. Because there are lots of things that are very important that we need to talk about right now.
Like that we're going broke.
Comrades, we must move on to the budget. Matthew, you have been singular in your focus, warning of the overspending. Has Nicola slashed enough, or does the altar of Milton Friedman cry out for more fresh blood?
Well, I think first thing is she will spend more than any finance minister in New Zealand's history. She will tax more than any finance minister in New Zealand's history, and she'll borrow an ample amount that will be right up there with Grant Robertson, Muldoon, or Bill English at his worst. So let's just understand that it's not that the total amount the government's going to spend is declining. On the construction issue, the problem there is not that they cut the funding so much as they got rid of the pipeline. Now they're trying to build a new one, and everyone left. It wasn't that the government cut the money; it was that they stopped the project. Anyway,
no, the government cut the money. Trust me.
So what we've got is a government that's going to spend more than ever, tax more than ever, and borrow as much as the worst, and a decision just simply has to get made. Are we going to cut into the welfare state? Particularly superannuation and tertiary healthcare. If yes, okay, that's the approach we're going. And I think the country could decide, okay, that's the way we're going, and a leader could sell that and it could work. Or we're going to have to raise tens of billions of dollars of tax.
Amen.
And we're going to need a leader who can sell that, not the rubbish we heard from Chris Hipkins, I'm sorry to say, because I loved his speech today. You just can't. The maths is the maths. And we've been warned about this since the baby boomers failed to have enough kids.
Yep.
We knew what 2030 would mean. Michael Cullen, and before him, Winston Peters, Bill Birch and Ruth Richardson had got us in a position where we were meant to have 20% of GDP or thereabouts in the bank by 2030. Instead, we're going to reach 2030 something like 30% in the red. So we're 50% roughly, I mean, these numbers aren't exactly right, but a very large amount of GDP, coming up to 50% of GDP, in the wrong direction from where we were supposed to if Michael Cullen's plan had been continued with. And this is a serious problem, and there is no point people thinking that cutting more tea room people in Wellington makes a difference.
Follow-up question. There is a rumour that a former right-wing female politician sent Nicola Willis and Brooke Van Velden a bouquet of flowers after announcing the pay parity kneecapping. Can you confirm, was that former right-wing female politician Ruth Richardson?
I don't know anything about a bouquet of flowers.
Did the flowers wither as soon as they...
I think Ruth's pretty critical of the current finance minister for the overspending.
Craig, we have seen in the last budget the National manufactured a funding crisis in health by underfunding the population growth and raising the age of patients. Will we see more of those tricks tomorrow?
Oh my God. Well, hopefully not tomorrow, the day after in terms of budget. Otherwise, they'll be even worse. I mean, Matthew, bless you. We've heard this every time for 30 years, 40 years. We've got to cut our cloth. We've got to cut our spending, right? If things don't go, we must make cutbacks, right? We have grown consistently as an economy when we have invested. in the economy. We have a huge infrastructure gap in the country, not because we've overinvested in the past, but because we've underinvested in the past. And the economy we have right now is a function of that underinvestment, not only in hard and physical infrastructure, but also in people, in skills, and making sure we have the economy that we need, right? The problem we have in New Zealand is not a debt crisis. We're one of the few countries that we saw the credit rating go up during COVID. Right? New Zealand has a higher credit rating than the US right now. Right? Our debt to GDP ratio is higher than it has been in the past. We've also had a pandemic.
Once in a century pandemic.
Prior, we had the delivery of the Canterbury earthquake sequence.
Yes.
Right? We've had to spend an awful lot of money during that period, right? There's no debt crisis. No one's every time we issue debt, right?
Keeps getting bought up, doesn't it?
It costs us $12 billion a year in interest already.
Every time we issue
how,
debt,
how much interest do you want to pay? Because we're paying $12 billion.
I tell you what I want is the results from the infrastructure.
Well, you're not going to get it.
Jobs. I want the incomes. I want the economy. And you can't have it without the infrastructure.
Well, I'll tell you what.
You can't have it both ways, Matthew. You really
can't. You have to increase the taxes. You should have
it both ways.
If you think that this country needs more debt, you are wrong.
No.
What is cited by left-wing people is this.
That's how we pay for
what
things.
What people are saying is this.
Right? Listen, that's how we pay for things. If we don't have debt,
we need to raise taxes or we need to cut spending.
We're going to raise taxes.
We should raise taxes.
This is absurd.
And more debt.
I want to address this debt thing because it's something the Labour Party, and you're on the Labour Party Policy Council, they consistently lie about this,
that
quite
is
frankly.
Outrageous.
What they say is...
Consistently lie about what?
What they say is, New Zealand doesn't have a debt problem. That is a lie.
It's absolutely not. Where is the debt crisis? Who is clamouring for debt reduction except for you?
We are paying already about $10 billion a year in interest. We have higher bond rates than places like Japan that do have bigger debt. When we borrow debt, we have to pay about twice.
Our OCR is higher.
We have to pay. Our 10-year bond rates are about 4.5 to 5 at the moment in places like parts of Europe. Japan, they're more like 2. So when we borrow $1 billion, we pay twice as much of it in interest than those countries with higher debt levels. The second point is they're not doing very well. Look at the United States with its debt levels.
So hang on a second. So we shouldn't have the hospitals or the schools or the roads that we need as a consequence of the debt because that doesn't return the 5% that you need.
If you borrow more,
no, hang on, you can't
still have to pay for it.
Yeah, look, you still
have to pay for it down the track.
Choices.
No, I want to understand. I want to understand what is the amount of debt per year that we want to. Do we want to pay $20 billion?
There is no arbitrary amount of debt.
Do we want to pay $20 billion?
There is no arbitrary amount of debt. The amount of debt that you need, you look at what you need to be spending on. You need to look at the services.
No, you do not.
Yes, you absolutely do.
Michael Cullen.
Hold on.
This is such a dishonest, and it's the most fundamental thing. They're going to try and win an election.
I hope so.
They are going to try and win an election the way Chris Luxon did, by pretending there's a money tree that they can offer $20 billion for this, $20 billion for that. They can't. They have to raise taxes.
Okay.
Tell the truth.
Luxon politics borrowed the money to pay their mates off.
Correct.
Right? Secondly, tanked the economy at the same time. So you got a double whammy: lack of receipts, and more paid out.
Yeah.
So you've got a debt crisis involved in their first budget, right? So let's park that up because otherwise we go around.
This is
circles.
more sensible.
Now what we've got to do is strike policies that work for Aotearoa, right?
Yes.
So if this $18 billion that's going to be spent on defence, what a joke. All we do is declare neutrality. We are the Switzerland of the South Pacific. We've got nothing that is of strategic license to anyone, right? To just get this bonhomie where we all march off to war and all that bullshit. Let's settle that down and let's start to invest that sort of money in our hospital infrastructure and in infrastructure per se. So just in one area of defence spending and changing our policy to align with our nuclear-free policy, the Party Māori says
that's rational. That's rational.
That's one, and that's just one saving.
Yes.
If you go to Australia and you're not a citizen, you pay 8% on any property that you buy on top of their 5% stamp duty.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's around 15% on top of $1 million buy, $150,000. We have nothing.
Yeah.
We have nothing. Luxon wants to bring in people here and buy up because they're going to generate more more employment or more investment. It's a load of bullshit.
Yeah.
So what we've got to do is do what all the other OECD countries do, is we have to have a stamp duty. We have to have some form of transaction tax in regard to capital, right? Then there has to be a wealth tax. You can't have 2% of society buying parliament and parliamentarians and determining that they get all the breaks.
Yes. John, we saw 300 million stripped from Māori budgets last year. What are you bracing for this budget?
What they've done in their announcements have broken out dollars that are already voted within the last budget, right? And they're just re-announcing old money. Okay, but it's been broken out in terms of a pittance here. Here's the other thing: all their announcements are over 4 years, divided by 4. Yeah, you get all these mugs in the media that say, "Oh, it's an outstanding dollar value." It's a joke.
Health is the best example of that, right? At the last budget, record investment of health, $16.6 billion. That money has to stretch all the way to 2030.
Right.
And as a consequence, every time you spend an extra dollar in health, it's a record amount, right?
That's right. And what JT just outlined there, I disagree with almost all of it, but it was mathematically credible and sane. What we are getting from Luxon and now from Hipkins is just nonsense.
Follow-up question,
and
John.
probably to work for them.
How on earth will new whānau ora contracts manage to have the depth and community reach of previous providers, and won't many actually just end up missing out?
Oh, look, no, we've got major problems. And so if we could just use immunology or vaccinations as an example. Someone's lied here, right? So we had a conversation earlier on. This health minister announces that somehow they've miracled and magicked up to 80% of immunisation rates across all communities. That's just unbelievable. At the same time, Plunkett's immunology campaign has tanked, gone through the floor in regard to the amount of money they get and the lack of performance. Now, one thing we're good at is data, right? Yeah, because we've had a number of investigations into us in terms of how good we are. So we know how to count now. Yeah. There is on all numbers coming out of this government at the moment, people have been beat up, and numbers are being promoted and presented. Yeah. They just don't ring right to me. Right. Unemployment 5.1%. Māori unemployment then is 11.
Yes.
Yep. Right.
Yes.
Now PI unemployment's got to be 11.
Yes.
So when you start to look at the impact in different communities and the large numbers of people and young, you've got your deficit expenditure in regard to policing, corrections, lawyers, courts, and then lockups. Yeah, it's going to go through the roof. Yeah, right. Now we've got 4,000 young Māori between 12 and 20, not on education, not on employment, not on skills. That's just in the West. Yeah, there's 22,000 sitting in South Auckland. Right. Now straight away you've got about 30,000 kids. They don't know where else to go but get up to mischief. Yeah. Now MSD knows where they are. MOE knows where they are. They're getting paid different dollar values, doing nothing for it. So we've got this cooked up crisis, okay, of feeding off Māori failure. We've had enough of it. Yeah. Now here's what the budget's going to do. In every budget up till last year, every dollar voted for Māori, 98 cents in the dollar goes to Pākehās, by Pākehās, for Māoris. When they fail, we get the blame. Yeah. Now, all we're saying is this is $36 billion. This is $36 billion. On an equity adjuster over time at 5%, just a random number, could have been 15 under the Sapere consultancy, 15%. But to do 5, it's $46 billion. These are annual transfers. So somebody is making a lot of money out of Māori failure and not being held to account for it. And we're sick and tired of people putting their hand in my pocket, spending my money for me, and then blaming me after they fail.
Have you transferred half of the $36 billion to the iwi and the urban Maori authorities and used the other half for much needed debt repayment, you'd get better outcomes.
Craig, you had difficulty gaining access to the lockup because of a game of the finance minister who had banned you. How fragile is the minister to criticism if she's going as far to ban the Economist of the largest trade union movement in the country? How thin is her skin?
Well, it certainly doesn't sort of speak well to the mental state of the government if it's banning individuals. I mean, ban the CTU, ban angiogratism, right? But if you're banning me personally, because I was told by the Treasury, you can send anybody you like except me.
Yeah.
Right? That speaks to a kind of,
No,
that is really
it's the
weak.
thuggery that I've just talked to you about, Winston Peters.
Yeah.
But you did
About
say
Seymour.
that,
But I don't.
Craig,
About-
you did
about
say that the
Luxon.
tax cut numbers didn't add up.
Which they didn't.
Well,
Then you had to go.
I
Surely.
had to go.
Matthew, what should the budget do versus what we're going to see?
probably this would lead to the end of the coalition, but worse things would happen in the world. They have to immediately do something about superannuation. There's a range of options. They need to do it immediately.
So Gen Xers get screwed over again.
No,
Is that what you're telling me? Gen Xers get screwed again.
There has to be a price paid by some of the baby boomers. When superannuation, it was obvious it was going to become
That's what I wanna
unaffordable.
hear.
It was the greatest generation, and they protested, and they joined the New Zealand First Party. They had actually fought in the war. They all died. And then suddenly the baby boomers said, we're not touching our super.
Yeah.
And, there's too many of them. But I'm telling you, in 13 years, they're not going to touch my super unless the baby boomers have had some cuts beforehand. They need to, and that's the only way to get the tens of billions of dollars that are necessary. If you're not going to raise tax by tens of billions of dollars.
The challenge there is that the distributional effects of that are absolutely enormous, right? So for me, tall, handsome, white economists like me, right, I lose, if you put 2 years off the super, I'd lose about 10% of my superannuation entitlement, right? For the average Māori male, you'd lose 25%.
Right.
Because of the different life expectancy.
Right.
Sure, and that's the argument against.
And as a consequence, it's giantly regressive as an approach. There may well be many ways of doing this, but taking a deliberately regressive approach seems like a really not very
You
sensible
could
thing.
means test. There's all sorts of things you can do. And the thing is, it won't be fair.
Oh God, no.
The point is, we're well past being able to make these adjustments in a way that's completely fair. It's not fair now.
Well, it's not fair now.
And we have to accept that it isn't going to be fair on some people because we're in the worst situation we could possibly be.
Quick round.
We are
Quick
absolutely
round.
not in the worst situation we could
Quick round.
possibly be.
What part of the Green Party budget was your favourite, John?
Taxes going up on the
Amen.
wealthy.
Amen.
Thank you.
What was your favourite part of the Green Party budget?
That they tried.
And Craig?
Ministry of Works.
Yes, Ministry of Green Works.
I thought it was a
Amen.
fantastic policy.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. John, your final word this week, please, is sir.
Just our people just need to believe in themselves, and they are. And this government, thankfully, is threading that needle for us quite nicely. And I just think it's outstanding. You'll have a look at a number of our campaigns heading into 2026. And by 2029, or the latest 2032, we'll be up to 11 seats.
Yeah.
2032, 11 Māori seats.
Preach. Craig, your final word this week, please, sir.
Can I have a word and a number?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. So I hate to bring up the C word again, but cuts. This budget, we're going to see giant cuts right across many areas in many sensitive bits of spending of government, things that don't need to be cut. No plan for what happens when we do cut, just that's on you. No. I've seen that. It was the 80s in the UK. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. And the number that I'd give to you as a consequence is 531. Because by my reckonings, there's about 531 days to the next election. And we can't waste a single day pointing out the damage that this shocking government, this amateur government, is actually doing to New Zealand, because we can't have another 1,000 days of this government led by Christopher Luxon.
Matthew, your final word, please.
Well, I would like to think that if there is to be a change of government, the Labour Party will step up the way it does every 50 years when New Zealand faces a serious crisis, as it did with the Great Depression, and the Savage Nash government stepped up and took the changes, the best intellectual ideas of the time, and did what they believed was right for the long term, and they established the welfare state. Exactly 50 years. In the 80s, we were completely stuffed, and the Labour government came in, and it did what it believed was right for the long term. It was bold with the Long Ian Douglas government. We're now facing... We've now had another 50 years since then. It's nearly 100 years since Savage. And if there is to be a Labor government, it needs to be, the 7th Labor government has to be like the 1st or the 4th. Not the same policies, but it needs to break the cycle of John Keyism, Jacinda Luxism, Jacinda Ardernism, Christopher Luxism, and what I'm concerned about with tonight, Hipkins, though, doesn't seem up to be what's required. Unless he's lying, and I hope he is.
But
he's making
he's going to need support parties, and they'll give him some honesty and some backbone. Yeah.
Some spine. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. This is the launch of my new weekly political podcast, and I wanted to take the time to explain the why and who of it all. You might remember me from the award-winning political podcast, The Working Group, which had a 5-year run and was gloriously fun. However, that show ended last month in a supernova of drama after my free speech traumatised right-wing free speech champions. Comrades, after watching the libertarian you spent 5 years working with burn your collective work down in a Viking funeral that only he's invited himself to, an odd thing occurred to me. I felt a fire in my belly. At first, I thought it was an ulcer or a stroke, but as the weeks have passed, I have felt a growing anger that I've spent so long creating a space to debate with the right where they never intended to have any debate at all. It was most apparent to me after the Treaty Principles Referendum Select Committee. The right didn't want a debate over the Treaty Principles referendum. They wanted the pretense of a debate so they could hold that engagement up and masquerade it as legitimacy. I am sick of having a debate with the bad faith right and want to lead a new political podcast that is unashamedly left and wanting to ask the hard questions about the issues and take the debate to the right rather than allow them a faux engagement, which is why I've launched the Bradbury Group with a nod towards the great panel shows of old like the Ralston Group and the McLaughlin Group. And who the hell am I? I'm Martin Bomber Bradbury. I've been in the media political game for 33 years. I've been behind some of the biggest political stories in this country. I have led mass protest movements against the power of the state, and I have set up left-wing political parties, been a consultant to the political left, and I have taken the police to court for breaching my civil rights. I'm a Gen X solo dad who lives in a wee apartment with my daughter, who is the apple of my eye. I like my Panthers black, my weather underground, and my flagpoles honey-heckied. If you need to put me in a box, I'm a post-Marxist eco-socialist with violent environmental tendencies. Comrades, my fellow countrymen, countrywomen, and country they-thems. I don't speak for corporations, or the powerful, or the polluters. I've spent my entire life speaking for us, the 90% who don't have the wealth. I'm old enough to have seen the impact of privatisation in the 80s. I know it smashes our communities, our whānau, our friends, far harder than it ever hits the rich pricks pushing that privatisation agenda. Comrades, your enemy isn't some kid transitioning. It's not a Māori woman in politics, a Māori woman in media, a Māori woman just walking outside. We've really got a problem with giving shit to our Māori women, haven't we? Your enemy isn't drag queen story time. It's not environmentalists. It's not beneficiaries. It's not state tenants. It's not renters. It's not the treaty. Your enemy is who it's always been. The banks, the billionaires, the corporations, the powerful who use social media hate algorithms to warp you into believing their interests are your interests when nothing could be further from the truth. 8 p.m. Tuesday nights, the Bradbury Group is where we're going to church, brothers and sisters. I will challenge the political establishment every week and demand your interests as the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, are put before fear, anger, and downright stupidity. We should not accept the common good being strangled by deregulation for donors' interests. We need to be kinder to individuals and far crueler to corporations. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Kia ora, Aotearoa.